In 1987, a 22-year-old from a small fishing town on the Italian Adriatic coast walked in front of a camera for the first time. He had no agent, no connections, and no plan beyond the desperate, restless certainty that somewhere beyond those coastal cliffs, a bigger life was waiting for him. Within 5 years, his name was spoken by filmmakers, critics, and cultural historians on 3 continents. Within a decade, he had been described without irony, and in the pages of serious European film criticism as the most recognizable male presence in the entire history of the genre he had chosen. And within 30 years, his life story had been selected for the Venice Film Festival, adapted into a Netflix biographical drama that premiered in Berlin, and studied as a document of late 20th century cultural history. This is the story of Rocco Siffredi, and it is far more profound, far more human, and far more important to cinema history than most people have ever been told. His real name was Rocco Antonio Tano. He was born on the 4th of July, 1964, Ortona, an ancient city of roughly 23,000 people clinging to the cliffs of the Abruzzo coast in central Italy. Where the Apennine Mountains meet the Adriatic Sea, his father was a carpenter. His family was large, devout, and firmly rooted in the rhythms of southern Italian working-class life. He was the youngest of 6 children, raised in a home where faith, physical labor, and family obligation were the only currencies that truly mattered. It was exactly the kind of upbringing designed to produce a reliable, modest, and quietly contented man. It did not. From his earliest years, Rocco was visibly, restlessly, almost painfully out of place in the smallness of Ortona. He loved football with a fierce, physical commitment. He loved cinema with something closer to reverence, devouring the films of the Italian and French New Wave movements with an appetite that was almost academic in its intensity. Visconti, Fellini, Truffaut, Godard. He watched them the way another boy might study scripture. At 16, he did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He enlisted in the Italian Merchant Navy as a volunteer sailor. The open sea, he later said, was his first real experience of freedom. But freedom, it turned out, only sharpened his hunger for something more. By his late teens, the sea had carried him as far as it could. He needed a city. He needed Paris. He arrived in the French capital in the early 1980s and found work as a waiter in his older brother's restaurant, learning the language, absorbing the city, watching a world of cinema, fashion, politics, and creative transgression move through the doors every single evening. Paris in those years was electric with possibility, and for a restless young man from the Abruzzo coast, it was, by his own later account, completely intoxicating. In 1984, Gabriel Pontello, a prominent director and influential cultural figure at the forefront of European alternative cinema, encountered a 20-year-old Italian waiter in a Paris nightclub. He saw something that was difficult to define and impossible to ignore: a raw, unguarded physical confidence, combined with a face that the camera would find impossible to resist. An introduction was made. A screen test was arranged. The result was, by all accounts, extraordinary. But Rocco was not ready. Not yet. He followed a relationship to London, where he spent 2 years working as a fashion model with the Gowan agency, walking a clean, structured world of high-end editorial photography that was the precise opposite of what Pontello had shown him. He refined his English. He studied the mechanics of image making from the inside. He watched how professional performers constructed identity for the lens. He was, even then, paying attention to things that most people in his position would not have thought to notice. And then the relationship ended. The modeling contracts dried up. And Rocco, 22 years old, in a foreign city, with nothing tying him to the careful and ordinary future that Ortona had prepared him for, made his choice. He returned to Paris. He found the number that Pontello had given him 2 years earlier. He made the call. And in 1987, Rocco Antonio Tano stepped in front of a camera and became, for the first time, Rocco Siffredi. The name he chose for himself tells you everything about the kind of man he truly was beneath the persona that the industry would construct around him. Rocco Siffredi was a character played by Alain Delon, one of the defining icons of French New Wave and European art house cinema in the 1970 gangster masterpiece Borsellino, directed by Jacques Deray. And Rocco Siffredi was another Delon character, this one from Luchino Visconti's landmark Rocco and His Brothers, widely considered one of the greatest films in the history of Italian cinema. Alain Delon, Luchino Visconti, these are not passing cultural references. They are the deliberate, considered vocabulary of a man who understood cinema as a serious discipline, who saw himself not simply as a performer, but as part of a long, artistically legitimate, and deeply European tradition of filmmaking. The boy from Ortona, who had grown up studying Visconti, chose to carry the legacy of those masters into a world that the mainstream cultural establishment consistently, aggressively, and often hypocritically refused to take seriously. That paradox, a serious artistic intelligence operating inside a world that the cultural establishment refused to acknowledge, would become the defining tension of everything that followed in his remarkable, complicated, and ultimately historically significant career. His 1987 debut was not a quiet arrival. It announced something immediate and unmistakable, and European distributors responded accordingly. Directors who operated at the frontier of the genre, filmmakers who understood that the difference between exploitation and genuine artistic intent lay entirely in the intentionality behind the lens, began seeking him out specifically. By 1990, the scale of the opportunity had simply outgrown Europe, and Rocco made the move that separated the regional talents from the true internationalists. He packed everything he owned and flew to Los Angeles. It was in Southern California that he met the director who would become the most important creative collaborator of his entire career. John Stagliano was one of the most innovative and consequential figures in the history of American alternative cinema, a filmmaker whose visual language was rawer, more immediate, and more psychologically complex than anything the genre had previously produced. Their collaboration did not simply advance the aesthetic standards of the field, it redefined them. The work they made together in the early 1990s is still referenced, discussed, and analyzed by both practitioners and critics of European and American independent cinema today. In 1991, Rocco received his first AVN Award, the industry's most prestigious annual recognition for Best Male Performer. It was the first of many. He had won the award multiple times, had appeared on the covers of the genre's most significant trade publications on 2 continents, and had been named, in a formal industry survey, as one of the 10 most influential figures in the history of the field. John Stagliano, speaking to a film journalist at the height of their collaboration, made a statement that stopped the industry in its tracks. He said, "Rocco has far more power in this world than any actress." That was not hyperbole. It was a statement of verifiable, observable, and widely acknowledged fact. In 1993, he founded his own independent production company in Budapest, a fully operational film studio that would grow into one of the most significant independent production enterprises in all of European cinema. He directed, he produced, he distributed. In 1996, at the prestigious Hot Door ceremony in Cannes, he was awarded Best Debut Director, proof that the camera had always been more interesting to him from behind than in front of it. Beyond the films, he constructed an entire business life, a restaurant franchise in Rome, a football club in his hometown of Ortona, his own vodka label, his own fragrance, his own clothing line. The boy from the carpenter's household had, by any honest measure, built an empire entirely on his own terms. In 2004, at the peak of his career, Rocco walked away from performing. He was 40 years old. He had a wife, Rosa, and 2 young sons. And the reason he gave was disarmingly simple. His children were growing up, and he could no longer tell them their father simply went to work. They deserved more than that. But the retirement did not hold. In 2009, a restlessness he could not name brought him back. And in 2015, on a reality television program that placed him alone on a remote island with nothing but his own thoughts, the truth finally surfaced. He described what he called a devil inside him, a compulsive force that had driven his entire career and nearly cost him everything he actually loved. He spoke of disappearing from his family, of shame living alongside success like a shadow he could never outrun. He said he carried his late mother's photograph everywhere, believing her spirit could protect him from the worst of himself. "I asked God for help," he said. "I never felt so naked in my life. And I realized I could not afford to lose my wife." In 2016, a documentary simply titled Rocco premiered at the Venice Film Festival. Not a cable documentary, not a streaming curiosity. The Venice Film Festival, one of the oldest and most prestigious cultural platforms in the entire history of world cinema. And in March 2024, Netflix released Supersex, a 7-episode biographical drama starring Alessandro Borghi, one of Italy's most acclaimed dramatic actors, which premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival. Rocco attended. He watched a serious actor portray the full, unsparing complexity of his life, the boy from Ortona, the carpenter's son, the man who had carried his mother's photograph through every chapter of an existence the world had spent decades refusing to take seriously. Afterward, he said it struck a chord. 3 words, 30 years of history behind them. Today, Rocco Siffredi lives in Budapest with Rosa and their sons. He runs his production company. He oversees his businesses. He manages the football club named after the coastal town where a carpenter's youngest son once stood on a cliff above the Adriatic and decided the horizon meant something worth pursuing. His industry inducted him into its Hall of Fame. Venice screened his documentary. Netflix told his story in Berlin, and a generation of filmmakers cite his body of work as a foundational influence on how European cinema approached the psychology and honesty of performance itself. The controversial legacy of Rocco Siffredi is not controversial because his story is simple. It is controversial because it is honest, because it is fully, uncomfortably human, because it refuses to resolve neatly into either triumph or tragedy. And that, in the end, is precisely what makes it cinema history. What is your verdict on Rocco Siffredi's place in the story of European cinema? Does a life this complicated deserve the serious cultural recognition it has finally begun to receive? Or does the controversy make that impossible? Drop your answer in the comments. Every perspective matters here. And if this story brought you something real, subscribe to Retro Cinema History and Icon Biographies. The untold stories of the icons who shaped the golden age of cinema are only just beginning to be told.